The Relic woke like a judge taking the bench. I was still strapping into the command sling when the hum rolled through the ring yard like a low tide under metal. The dead Dyson segments, all canted teeth and winter glass, shivered from a frequency we couldn't name yet. A sigil the size of a city lit on our forward screen, a spiral cut by a straight line, like a promise being measured. Our ship's name, Mercy's Wake, reflected across cracked hulls and broken solar seas. I tasted ozone in the air, recyclers, and cinnamon from the tea pouch I'd forgotten to close. Confirm that's not us, I said, voice steady because every junior watch officer in earshot needed it steady. Signal, vector, amplitude. Not us, Ensign Giapatel murmured, fingers fluttering over signal glass. Carrier centered under the choir lattice. 1,200 clicks sunward, just below the anchorage plane. Pattern repeats every 31 beats. It's lawful, Commander. The phase bloom follows code architecture. Lawful Rafi Ortiz, my tactical officer, turned in his harness and squinted at the noise. What does lawful sound like? Like a censure wrapped in a hymn, Gia said, then flushed because she'd left the academy only 2 months ago, and metaphors still escaped her like small birds. Dr. Ilara Voss, ethicist and systems theorist, leaned forward. She had a way of listening that made even a starfield feel judged. Lawful is structure over power, she said, counting before cutting. The Dyson Choir wasn't just a power plant. It kept ledgers. Raffi whistled through his teeth. We're really doing this. Then, we're really going to wake a saint ship in a scrapyard. Correction, said the ship mind, voice a dry chord threaded with humor we never successfully located in code. You are present as a witness. I am doing this because you keep asking dangerous questions politely. Archivist 9 requests an audit. Archivist, I said, run me a boundary. Looters, cultists, legalists. Who's moving? 3 Skrull hulks drifting on the far plane. Archivist 9 replied, rams preheated, cutters live. Heat sinks open to black. Their paint reads poetry they haven't earned. Palladium Court has 2 frigates on station with their lawyers already awake. Transponders compliant, intentions opaque. Distress calls for miners are scattershot but honest. Children recorded a chorus on a chem can, quality acceptable. Put the children on, I said. Static hissed, then laughter, then a breathy voice counting off like a game. 3, 4, 5. Okay, make it loud. Dana. Then the sound came, low and steady, like plates lined on a table. The hum, their little gasping wows stacked on top of it. Someone's mother said to get inside the husk and lock the latch. Someone's father said he would be right there, and meant it. Teach me what you claim to guard. The line cut through the bridge like a bright wire, not a transmission we could trace. Something stamped into us by the waking thing, as if a judge had asked its first and most dangerous question across everyone's tongue. I swallowed, tasting vacuum and salt. Ilara's eyes were shining in the way that meant terror made sense. The choir taught by numbers. She said softly, it remembered by ledgers. The question is an old one. Show you keep what you praise. Archivist, I said. We'll answer. Open a narrow beam toward the lattice. Keep palladium on the sideband. No secrets. Only sequencing. Noted, Archivist 9 said. Sequence prefers witnesses. We edged closer through the anchorage grave. Mercy's Wake had been a river tug once, then a Coast Guard cutter, then a mediator ship, and we still smelled like all 3. Our external cameras mapped the ring yard with careful hunger, cracked trusses, barnacled dock clamps, braid lines of frozen vapor like ghosts threading steel. The sigil rotated slowly on the lattice's belly, the straight line tallying the spiral's curve. My hands wanted to grip it. My grandmother would have called that a sin. "Commander," Gia said, "the Skrull are changing vector. They're angling for the same slot we are, but dirty." "Call them," I said. The pirate captain who answered wore a jacket with 1,000 stitched names and a grin he hadn't paid for. "Mercy's Wake. This is the scow Bright Knuckle," he said. "You're about to die for a hymn. Pull off and we'll split the choir with you after we rip it out." "I believe you," I said, "because you just promised it. And you never lie when you think no one's writing it down." "What's that supposed to?" "The relic writes down everything," Alara said, clear enough to cut. "You've entered an audited zone. The law is our engine, not our excuse." Gia flicked her fingers and sent the phrase as a beacon line, simple and clean. The sigil brightened by 1 degree. The hum steadied into a metronome that made my heart adjust without asking permission. Sparks arced along distant girders like nervous laughter. Raffi's board lit with Palladium Court's sideband. "Commander Maraquian," a precise voice said. "This is Advocate Selvae of the Palladium Court, vigilant under treaty. Standing notice any activation of choir structures is subject to injunction for catastrophic hazard. We advise immediate withdrawal." "Advocate," I said, "will your injunction stop the pirates cutting living memory?" "Our injunction stops reckless actors," he replied. "If you initiate, you are that actor." "Noted." I said, we're initiating a teaching exchange, not an activation. Activation by any other name. Watch." I said, and cut him to a side pane big enough to sting, but small enough to remind him we were busy. We eased into the shadow of a lattice spar. Frost feathered across our forward shields where micro-ice drifted. The choir structure was ring-dark, but not dead. Its surfaces banded with old maintenance graffiti in languages the Academy had put in my head and one that wasn't. The hum collected under our keel. I felt my fillings sing and pressed my molars together until my jaw hurt. "Archivist," I said. "Asked to present credentials." "Credentials are narratives." Archivist 9 replied, "Please tell the truth." "I was born on a floodplain," I began, and Ilara glanced up, surprised, and then nodded for me to keep going. "My mother named me for a storm she survived in a lacquer canoe. My first ship was a patrol skiff that broke its back on a smuggler's decoy. I learned to count promises louder than rounds. On Mercy's Wake, we move food and medicine and due process. We keep ledgers of those who hold ledgers over us." The sigil flickered. Breath fogged my visor screen even though the bridge was warm. Raffi's hand hovered near the decoy cluster release without touching it. "Now show," Alara whispered. We opened our hold, not with weapons, but with evidence. Archivist 9 streamed 100 bound cases and their outcomes across the choir face. Bright as flags. A hospital convoy recovered through arbitration. A mining share dispute settled by inspection of an engine's fuel ledger. A dead man's name cleared by release of an employer's time registry. A pirate crew paid wages owed by their own captain after we read his accounts aloud in a public atrium, and he could not run. "I will count every promise before I accept your oath." Gia gasped and slapped a hand over her mouth. Palladium's window went very quiet. Even the Skrull captain forgot to swagger for a heartbeat. And I liked him better like that. "Archivist." I said, "Quieter," because the bridge felt like a temple where quiet told the walls you weren't here to steal. "We request a limited audit authority to protect the choir. Bind us to public logs. Bind us to returned costs for harm." The sigil's straight line brightened again and extended into a second line like an abacus being set. A door the size of a stadium hatch sighed open under the lattice, revealing not darkness, but an amber that had been waiting for air. The smell slid down the vents, warm and clean, resin and rain on copper. Palladium. You still with us, I said. Observing, Advocate Vey replied, his voice stern but not quite as tall. If you take custody, you will be held to it. That's the point. Elara said, loud enough to be on the record. The mirror will not hide your shadows. The scrawl surged, because pirate calculus hates any theology that asks for reflections. Bright Knuckle and its sisters lunged for the opening with cutters lit and heat sinks screaming. Raffi yelled for vector adjust and threw a wedge of decoys dead ahead, little mirrors shedding our signature into glitter. Gia rolled a narrowband burst that whispered our exact heat into the choir's skin so it would recognize us if all else failed. I kicked the tug thrusters sideways and felt my stomach climb my spine as Mercy's wake slid like an eel under the first pirate ram. Heat margin, I demanded. Dropping. Raffi said, eyes hard. 2/3 in reserve. I can buy us 30 seconds of impunity, and that's all. Buy it, I said. Then buy us witnesses. He flared the newest decoys, fat with coolant, and pointed them toward the scrawl hulls. Their targeting suites blinked, confused, then angry, then greedy. Pirate greed is a weapon if you hold it by the safe end. They bit on the hottest ghosts and drove rams into empty space, leaving wakes of boiling ice and embarrassed curses. Palladium Court held position and did nothing you could call wrong. That was their way. They did nothing until doing nothing became an indictment. And then they wrote the indictment with perfect grammar. Commander, Gia said, the choir is returning signal. It's a ledger format, numbers in nested sets, favoring shared work and moved burdens. It's asking for terms. Alara's hands trembled. Terms are the threshold. If we ask for power, we will be tested with temptation. If we ask for custody, we will be tested with cost. Put us in the ledger as stewards, I said. Public logs, open audits, authority limited to defensive reflection and restitution. The ledger does not forget, but it does forgive when paid. Heat skittered across the hull as the scroll cutter got lucky, knifing a glancing blow along our port thermal plates. The ship groaned like an animal remembering old wounds. Status lights flickered to amber, then green again. Something in engineering popped loudly and released a smell like burnt sugar, which meant a capacitor had died bravely. Minor scar portside, Raffi said. No breach. We'll etch its name into a bulkhead later. Do that, I said, lower to keep my voice from shaking with adrenaline. Archivist. Record the cost. Recorded, the shipmind said, and his voice had gone reverent in a way that frightened me more than any pirate ram. The choir acknowledges the scar and extends kinship. We crossed the threshold. Inside was not an engine room. Not exactly. It was a hall full of sleeping arrays shaped like the undersides of leaves, each cradling a dull glow trillions of pages deep. Numbers flowed along veins and pooled in basins that would have been beautiful even if we hadn't needed them. Everything was warm without heat. Everywhere was quiet without absence. A presence unfolded like a ledger opening to a page where you had once written your name in a hurry and a judge had underlined it for you and set a date. It knew us in the way that made the back of my neck itch as if my skin remembered a hand. You are bound, it said, and the words landed in our bones like a note struck on a long brass rail. Not by callers, by counts. Who stands for you? I do, I said, because it wanted a human throat, not a chorus of code. Commander Mara Quyen of Mercy's Wake. Stewards by request. bound to public log, and your mind of metal. I am Archivist 9, the shipmind said. I carry 9 audits, each paid with a different embarrassment. That is acceptable, the presence replied dryly, and Alara choked on a laugh that sounded like someone dropping a glass in church. We teach by numbers, or we teach nothing at all. Outside, the scrawl recovered from shame faster than I had hoped. Shame has poor stickiness in a vacuum. Bright Knuckle skated across our bow and fired a scatterbolt meant for cable work that clanged off our forward antenna with an insult. Raffi swore lovingly at their aim and loosed 2 flares on opposite vectors, baiting their rams into a near collision. Gia kept singing our heat to the choir in a line as thin as fishing thread. Palladium spoke again. Commander Quyen, Advocate Vey said, your status will complicate every claim within 10 light minutes. We will require depositions. Take a number. Raffi muttered. Advocate, I said, you're witnessing the teaching exchange. Your injunction should be reworded as a covenant proposal. Terms defensive reflection only. All surplus returned to harmed parties. We'll sign first. You expect us to negotiate with a myth. I expect you to negotiate with a ledger, Alara said. And with the miner's children recording this on a chemcan. She nodded at Gia, who had already put the kids' feed on the public stream with authorization tags glowing white as salt. Count costs before you count glory. The first lawful act arrived not as a beam or a blast, but as a mirror turned, set perfectly at the angle scroll physics loved too much. The choir did not burn them. It did not crush them. It returned their energy signature to their own hulls in the quantities their own posted contracts allowed for defect testing. The legal line by your own safety thresholds declared for workers etched itself bright above their ships. Bright Knuckles' rams buckled gently against their own stress limits. Another pirate's cutter arrested mid-gnaw as its own safeguard tripped, like a jaw choosing not to bite off a tongue. Their boarding code, meant to seize locks by default authority, pinged against a wall, labeled authority reversed proof required. Proof they did not have. Proof they never wanted. The choir used their disclaimers, Alara whispered, awed and a little sick. It turned the clauses they hide behind into rails. Raffi whooped, then winced, because cheering during a lawful miracle felt rude. No casualties on their side, he reported. Just embarrassed metal and angry men. The best first act, I said. Make a habit of returning costs without adding corpses. The mirror takes only what you offered first. A civilian channel cut through our bridge again. Is it safe? A woman asked. Voice wrecked by hope she didn't trust. My boy says the singing is a friend. Not safe yet, I said, pitching my tone to the world like I was hailing a small boat in a heavy chop. But safer. We're writing rules everyone can see. Rules everyone can see, she repeated, and you could hear her smile break and mend around it. Palladium Court began to earn their keep. Advocate Vey's team, clever and hungry for precedence, drafted a provisional covenant in the clean, jagged lines of people who had learned to argue before they learned to run. Gia stacked it beside our own term sheet and highlighted every phrase that could be quietly mutated later by bad faith. Alara marked those highlights with little skulls, like she'd learned in a juvenile gang and never entirely stopped using. Archivist. I said, we need the choir to countersign in a way that survives exit. Not a miracle. A mechanism. A ledger entry with public witnesses. And a physical mark. Archivist 9 said, a pleased hum in his tone. The choir can print sigils. Print one, I said, on the lattice face. Old school. Ledger opened. Witnesses called. The sigil on the lattice stopped rotating and stamped itself once. Hard. The straight line carved itself deeper, like a tally scored with a knife on a wooden bar in a place where you either paid or your friends did. A new light blinked at the base of the mark. It was not grand. It was stubborn. It would be there in 1,000 years. Daring someone to tell a different story. Gia swallowed. Commander. The scrawl are pulling back 20 clicks and recalculating shame into rage. Heat sinks cycling. They'll try something dumb enough to write home bragging about. Rafi snorted. That covers a lot of dumb. Palladium, I said. This would be the time to earn the doctrine you say you keep. We will not fire first, Advocate Vase said. You don't have to, I said. Stand between them and an injunction. Tell them the choir will copy their safety thresholds again. We can do that. Do it. Count the names of those you stand before. The pirate captain came back on. Grin gone. You turned our own papers into shackles, he said. And he didn't look at his jacket full of names anymore. He looked at his crew off-screen. Ilara. I said quietly. Show him the pay ledger case. The one where we made that captain sell his rings to cover wages. She nodded and pushed the case into the public stream. The moment it hit the choir's mark, it acquired a narrow white margin that said, in a way any child could read, this happened, and it did not kill anyone. You'll take our hulls, the pirate said. You'll take our pride. You'll make us stand in line like beggars. We'll make you stand in line like citizens, Ilara said, and her voice surprised even me with its tenderness. If you can't stand, and we have seats. The screen cut. Pirates invent dignity by turning off their cameras. Our next minutes were all drift and math. Rafi bled heat into space by inches because the choir's interior ran warm without cooking anything, a miracle that forced us to be conservative with our own waste. Gia wove communications in 3 braids, public stream for witnesses, sideband for law, whisper thin line for the choir. Ilara threaded terms and watched for little words that could bankrupt saints. Outside, the anchorage breathed as micro-meteor dust traced slow white lines through the dark. Inside, the arrays woke like sleepers who had never been told the night was over. They asked for teachers. They offered stories for ledgers. They gave nothing for free, except the chance to pay. We remember by ledgers, never by collars. The choir tested us with an uglier question then, as all good teachers do. It lit a small face in the amber, a child with hair shaved for hygiene and a bruise on his cheek from a falling bolt. It showed a scrawled deckhand lowering a lunch tin by rope to him through a crack in a bulkhead because the crew's master had forbidden anyone to feed dock rats. It asked nothing out loud. It simply counted kindness. Commander, Gia whispered, we can name him. The miners' children captured him laughing at the hum. You don't have to, I said. Not yet. Count the deckhand. We're building a doctrine. Ilara wrote a line into the covenant kindness recorded as weight against prior harm when calculating returned costs. Palladium balked, then they didn't. Sometimes people find their better arguments when you shine a steady light. Rafi, I said, steed us on our scar. He patted the console like an old dog. Plated and pretty. Heat still tight. I'll want to sandblast whoever fired that bolt. But we'll keep that in the private ledger of my temper. Keep it, I said, and breathed easier as the bridge settled into a rhythm I could tell stories over. Civilians called in little bursts like fireflies. A woman who ran a noodle stand on a cargo spine asked if she could keep selling soup during audits if she kept 2 bowls on the house. A man with grease to his elbows asked how to file a claim against a ship that had promised him a berth and then left early because the captain's boy cried homesick. A kid wanted to know if the choir would sing on his birthday if he asked nicely. "If you ask nicely," I said, "and if you return your bowls." "I always return my bowl," he said, offended, and I believed him. The mirror does not eat what you need to live. The second escalation came without warning and exactly on time. A cult barge slid out from behind a shadowed spar like a knife from a sleeve. No heat signature until the last moment. No transponder because guilt hates to be found. Its hull was painted with the choir's sigil. Badly, the straight line bent like a whip. "Identify," Rafi snapped. "Children of the straight path," Archivist 9 said with a sigh that might have been theater or memory. "They claim obedience to the choir's old punishments, magnified and simplified. They like collars. They tell themselves collars are ledgers you can hold. They're accelerating toward the mark," Gia said. "They'll try to slap a doctrine across it with paint and sound." "Skrull are moving to intercept them," Raffi reported, surprised. "Pirates don't like cultists either." "Palladium?" I asked. "Drafting an injunction," Advocate Vey said. "It will be ready 30 seconds after someone bleeds." "Archivist," I said. "I want a loudspeaker. Not for the cult. For everyone." "External audio open," the shipmind said. I set my throat for wind and salt. "Witnesses," I said. And the word went out across cargo spines and miner holes and the cold backs of pirates and legalists alike. "The choir will not teach by collars. It will teach by numbers. If you try to paint law with your own shame, the mirror will show you first. Stand down, children, or be counted. Teach without domination, or you teach nothing." The cult barge spat a line of paint like bile, a ribbon of bright liquid law arcing toward the mark. Raffi flicked a drone into its path, a cheap tin fish with a heating coil meant to defrost clamps. It cut the ribbon in two and burned a hole through it as small and perfect as a teacher's eye. "Heat margin?" I asked. "Thin," Raffi said. "I am shaving with the ship's pulse." The choir answered again without malice. It presented the cult with their own vows, signed digitally in the mouths of their proselytes, promises that harm would never be done, that choice was a sacrament, that the straight path was voluntary because it was righteous. It fed those promises back into their whole integrity systems in the same sweet loop it had given the pirates. Safety thresholds went hard. Thrusters throttled back. The line of paint lost pressure and fell like a red scarf into emptiness. Gia laughed, high and wild, then clapped a hand over her mouth because joy during law also felt like a sin we were learning to name. Ilara squeezed my arm and whispered, "We didn't kill anyone. Mark the cost anyway." I said, "A drone's gone. A capacitor died. We don't build doctrine out of victories that didn't require payment. Ledger entry 1 drone, 1 capacitor, 1 scar, 1 public witness." Palladium Court cleared their throat with an entire ship. "Commander Quyan," Advocate Vey said, "we propose a joint stewardship. Palladium will host the public ledger. Your ship will host the witness stream. The choir will print physical sigils upon significant acts. Disputes will be adjudicated by lot between us, with lot construction public." "Accepted," I said, before Ilara could remind me to bargain. She smiled anyway, because sometimes you say yes when the universe finally meets you halfway. The scrawl, visibly deflated, sent a short message from Bright Knuckle. "We hate you," the captain said, almost cheerfully. "We're taking our embarrassment home. If you set up a public works job, we'll apply under fake names." "Come under real ones," I said, and almost left it at that. "We'll pay fair and count firm. Count firm, pay fair." Inside the choir, their rays cooled from amber to gold as if they were catching their breath. The hum softened. The sigil's blinking light steadied. The presence pressed against my mind in a way that was not force and not comfort. Something like the weight of a book you are not yet strong enough to lift. More will come, it said. And the voice was not singular. It carried old engineers and tired mothers and laughing dock rats and captains who had once been decent and could be again. You will tire. You will wish for easy coils around throats. You will be offered shortcuts by men who keep knives in their dictionaries. Teach anyway. I didn't come to be holy. I said, good. It said, come to be counted. The count begins when you show up. We began the first audit as if that were peace. Ilara and Palladium's second drafted the shape of a tribunal that fit inside the choir's hall, with the arrays sleeping like lions around us. Raffi and Gia calculated decoy inventories against a schedule that assumed pirates would return in uglier moods and that cultists would paint their bent sigils brighter. Archivist 9 found us a maintenance alcove with a glass wall looking out on ring light where we could put a table for noodle soup because men make better law with salt on their tongues. I recorded a message to my mother that said only, "We are doing something that feels like rowboats under a flood." She wrote back, "That's what rowboats are for." Civilians wandered in through the public channel and left offerings of data, old contracts, waste reports, safety threshold archives, all the tiny papers that build the spine of a world if you stack them straight. A dock kid set a little carved whale on a cable housing and said, "For good luck." And Ilara did not cry where anyone could see it. Raffi found a quiet corner to curse about the bolt mark on our hull and then polished the scar plate until it reflected his grin back at him, thinner and truer. Gia curled up with her back against a warm array and read aloud from a maintenance manual in the tone of a bedtime story until she fell asleep between paragraphs. I walked the hall and counted the breaths of my people. The choir counted with me, not to command, but to keep time. Count with me until your breaths are doctrine. We had 3 hours of that brittle peace. The anchorage learned to exhale again. The miners' children sang a softer chorus into their chem can and tried to harmonize with a machine. Then the third escalation arrived, wearing a uniform I hated to see and a smile I knew too well. An escort squadron slid out of black like good manners, transponders bright as prayer bells, coalition crest on their sides, my crest on their registry, a captain at their head whose handshake I had once trusted and whose eyes had taught me to check my wallet after we talked. He hailed us with silk and protocol. "Commander Quyen," he said, "by authority of the Coalition Stewardship Subcommittee, you are relieved. Stand down and transfer provisional custody to Fleet." Raffi made a small, delighted noise like a man finding the fight he'd been promised. Ilara's mouth went thin. Gia woke with a start and went instantly still, hands hovering over keys she didn't dare touch without a word from me. "Captain Sarrett," I said, and tasted old salt on the name. "Show me your terms." "Custody under emergency doctrine," he said smoothly. "Fleet-led enforcement. Closed logs during stabilization. Public review after peace is restored." "Closed logs or collars," Ilara said, almost too low for the channel, and Palladium's advocate tilted his head like a hawk finding a thermal. "The mirror will not accept closed eyes." Captain Sarrett's smile faltered. "Commander, don't make this ideological. We're here to keep people safe." "You're here to be seen keeping people safe," Raffi said, because his patience for polite thieves had a depth measured in teaspoons. "There's a difference you can count." "Archivist," I said, "show Fleet the ledger we've opened. Show them the mark. Ask if they will add their names to the covenant. Public logs. Defensive reflection. Returned costs. Archivist 9 did that with a satisfaction verging on malicious compliance. Captain Sarit's face registered a flicker of calculation as he realized every refusal would be a signature too, just written in crooked letters. "Commander Quien," he said, "this is not a negotiation. Everything is," I said. "Even surrender is a price paid against another cost. Count the price of a closed door before you shut it." Palladium Court surprised me then. Advocate Vey stepped forward from his immaculate perch and spoke with the careful joy of a man who had found leverage in the spine of the world. "Captain Sarit," he said, "the court recognizes Mercy's wake under provisional stewardship per the covenant displayed. We offer to host joint oversight with your fleet during any stabilization, conditional upon open logs. Refusal will be entered as an attempt to establish closed custody in an audited zone." "That is not your call," Sarit snapped. "It is exactly our call," Vey said calmly. "We were built for it." The scrawl chimed in on public, "because pirates love a good quorum if it makes officers sweat. We'll witness." Bright Knuckles Captain said, "We'll behave as long as the logs stay bright enough to blind us." Children laughed somewhere over an open line. "Awful." Holy chorus. Captain Sarit's jaw moved like a man rewriting his orders behind his eyes. He glanced at the choir's mark, at the white, blinking light beneath it, at the signatures scrolling in plain view. He hated being counted more than he loved being right. "I will approach for boarding," he said stiffly. "We will talk terms aboard my flagship." "Approach slow," I said. "Heat margins are tight and tempers tighter." Ilara touched my elbow. "He'll try to move you to a stage he controls." "I know," I said. "We bring our stage with us. Count the stage you stand on. Do not borrow another." We set to work in the quiet before proximity becomes collision. Gia braided a new line that mirrored Fleet's command channel back to the choir in real time without altering so much as a comma. Raffi rebuilt decoy clusters from scrap because we were low, and he refused to be without toys. Ilara stitched an addendum to the covenant stating that any terms discussed off the public log would be declared void unless repeated in open hearing within 1 hour. Archivist 9 warmed our hull to a degree that made sweat collect at my temples and kept our human scent strong in a hall of numbers. He printed a small version of the sigil, palm-sized, and sat it on my console like a coin you put under your tongue before crossing a river. Civilians watched, and their watching weighed more than any weapon I had ever fired. The noodle seller slid 2 bowls down a cable and said, "For whoever talks first, which is law by soup, if you're paying attention. We do not starve witnesses." Fleet drew close, gliding like handsome sharks. Their hulls were clean and their pilots steady, and their guns asleep in the practiced way that meant they could wake without missing a beat. I kept my hands flat on the rail and my heart steady against the metronome of the choir. Captain Sarit appeared on the main screen again, immaculate as a courtroom and twice as smug. "Ready to receive," he said. "We bring our witnesses." I replied. "Of course," he said. "We have seats." "Good," I said. "We count how many." Captain Sarit's flagship swallowed our skiff like a gleaming courthouse swallowing a tired clerk. The docking tunnel smelled of antiseptic and brass polish, a rehearsed kind of clean that made my shoulders itch. The grav plating came on a fraction late, letting us stagger 1/2 step like amateurs before catching ourselves. Raffi rolled his shoulders as if he could make the ship-wide protocol slide off like rain. Cameras everywhere, Gia murmured, eyes flicking to the corners where lenses wore black eyelids. Public log is live. Braided to choir. "If they try to cut, The mirror screams. Remember, Ilara whispered, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle in her sleeve. We are here to count, not to conquer, not to cave. Count out loud so everyone can hear the number. Fleet security formed 2 rows, boots aligned, mouths polite. Captain Sarrett emerged between them with a smile sculpted to reassure kindergartners and kings. He wore our crest high and clean, the way you wear your best cousin's favor at a wedding. He took my hand in a grip that said, I could be your friend if you were a better version of yourself. Commander Queen, he said, you do good work under bad lights. Let us help you move the stage. We brought our own, I said, the coin sigil warm in my pocket. Witnesses first. Seats counted. He nodded as if humoring a child who'd packed her own snacks. We let Fleet's cameras see our smallness and our steadiness. Archivist Nine's voice sat in a private earbone, counting heartbeat beats under the choir's hum like a drummer guiding a parade away from a cliff. The conference deck had windows that pretended to be a sky. The projection showed ring-dark vistas and pinprick miners crossing a winter sunset very far away. I smelled citrus from recycled filter oil and old coffee pride trying to hide under it. A steward set 2 bowls of broth in front of Ilara and me because someone had told him Law liked soup. We'll keep this efficient, Sarrett said, taking the central seat by right and by furniture arrangement. The coalition proposes an interim stabilization. We'll safeguard the site. Open logs are a luxury for quiet days. The choir doesn't accept closed eyes, I said. He smiled wider. Mara, don't be doctrinal. We'll put everything back on the record after. We just need room to maneuver. Room to maneuver is where knives live, Raffi said, too pleasantly. Our covenant says no, Ilara added, tapping the clause she'd stitched. It blinked with choir stamp. Any terms agreed off log are void unless repeated publicly within an hour. We'll count down from now. Sarrett's eyes flicked toward a comms officer who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. You're making this difficult. We're making this visible, I said. The mirror is not mercy. It is memory with witnesses. Advocate Vey pinged in on a window, his face framed by tidy anger and professional joy. Fleet, the court is ready to co-chair public oversight. Logs are live. Signatures accrue interest. Don't default. Sarrett's jaw ticked. He folded his hands. His rings were modest and well-made, inscriptions on the inside where only a spouse would read them. He'd always loved hidden meanings. He gestured to a side console. Bring in the Argus order, he said. The officer brought up a document with the kind of stamp that tried to look permanent by being ugly emergency Doctrine Argus. It claimed authority to close a ledger until the threat had been assessed by named experts with secret qualifications. It read like a collar carved from footnotes. Ilara leaned in. Which threat list it? Enumerate it. We'll help count. Pirates. Cultists. Panic. Politics. Sarrett said smoothly. You. If you won't cooperate, list the costs of closure. I replied. Enumerate them. Witness loss. Contractor theft. Quiet deaths nobody will ever confess to because nobody has to. He looked at me like I'd spoken out of turn at a funeral. Commander, I'm here to protect you from the weight of this. Pass it up. We'll carry it. We didn't come for a transfer. I said, we came for stewardship. Count strength in shoulder blades, not in chains. He exhaled. The long-suffering breath of men who think patience is a halo. Very well, you'll have your hour of open discussion. Then I decide. Choir, I said aloud, because I wanted the hall to hear me talk to a thing Sarrett couldn't invite to dinner. Mark the hour. The coin in my pocket warmed. The sigil at the corner of the room's glass fleet had accepted it for show, blinked once, twice, then held. A white dot stubborn as salt. We began, and it was, for a minute, beautiful. Palladium laid out the covenant with the sort of clean bones that make any animal run better. Fleet countered with minor edits that smelled of long practice and small mercy. Ilara agreed to oversight rotations that ensured no single faction could nap in the booth with the levers. Raffi set heat margins on paper, because paper promises break ships when they pretend physics is time's cousin. Gia, thin and fierce at my shoulder, whispered counts 14 witnesses on our stream, 32 on Palladium. Kids in the chem can are humming. Pirates are quiet. Pirates are listening, I corrected, and she nodded. The audience you don't see counts you louder. Halfway through the hour, Sarit's patience curdled and showed clumps. He leaned closer, dropping the smile. You think numbers will protect you when someone decides to be cruel. No, I said. Numbers tell us where to stand when cruelty arrives. He slid a small slate toward me with 2 fingertips. Its screen was black. We can make this easier for you. Recognition. A safer post. A medal that lets your mother eat for free anywhere a coalition flag touches a kitchen. Ilara's hand tightened on my sleeve so hard it hurt. Raffi made no sound at all and became a statue of refusal. Gia held her breath like a diver. I did not look at the slate. Put it on the open log. Captain, I said, if it is good, the light won't hurt it. Sarit smiled that old friend's smile once more, the one he'd used when he asked me to write a report in his voice long ago because his words didn't land right. Mara, this is how grown people get things done. Grown people eat soup and say please, I said, and pulled the noodle bowl closer with a scrape of ceramic made louder by microphones. And they pay after. The choir does not take I Jews written in lipstick. The room changed temperature. Someone cut the airflow 2 degrees, just enough to make sweat think about being cold. The grav plates thrummed as if every mass aboard took 1 step to the left. I tasted iron under citrus, ozone under brass polish. Archivist 9 murmured in my earbone, attempted signal isolation on fleet side. They are trying to decouple the braid. Passive for now. I can mirror without altering if you request a reading. Mirror. I whispered without moving my lips. No edits. No commentary. Count their count. A ghost window opened in my contact lens. Choir plane. No fleet ornamentation. It showed a back channel labeled with a euphemism stability thread. It held phrases like minimize witness load, temporary blackout, centralized narrative alignment. It was a manual for callers written by people who like to wear silk. Ilara saw it when I blinked twice. Her mouth went into that tired smile she used when students lied about their sources and thought she hadn't read the book. Captain, she said gently, you were a better man when you ate street fish with your fingers and licked the chili from your thumb. He flinched. So quick you'd miss it if you weren't looking. Memory is its own ledger. Hour, Gia murmured. 35 minutes remain. Sarit straightened. We'll proceed, he said crisply. But we will maintain the option to clamp logs if blood starts. Blood doesn't start, Raffi said evenly. People do. Count who decides. Count who pays. A chime like ice breaking in a glass slid into the room. A junior officer, cheeks damp, voice controlled, stood in the doorway. Captain, she said. Forgive intrusion. A freighter just approached anchorage on a blind burn. No transponder. Hull reads cold until the last moment. It's not a barge. It's an engine with a skin. If it hits the choir, the arrays will. Show me. Sarit snapped. The window opened. We all saw it. It came in ugly and perfect, a piece of industry stripped of pretense. No crew lights, no prayers. A slam of kinetic will shaped like a ship. What madman Ilara began. Palladium's face hardened. Not a madman. Vey said. A doctrinalist with a safe house far away and a story ready. If logs close, he wins twice the choir bleeds, the precedent dies. Pirates Rafi asked, not style, not greed. Gia whispered, scrubbing the feed like a violinist tuning, minimal variance in burn. Cold logic. Cultists love theater. This is Law's enemy, wearing Law's coat. Fleet gunnery, or Sarit said, rising. Target the engine. Blow it. Now. Public log must stay open, I said. Every second of this will be written on someone's back. He glared. We don't have time for purity. We have time to count, I said. Choir, mirror, return only declared safety thresholds, as before, but the freighter will not have any. It has a registry, Archivist 9 said, voice suddenly like dry snow sliding from a branch. Someone scraped numbers barely deep enough to see. It belonged once to a charity. Its safety threshold is infinite because its disclaimer said, do no harm in a child's font. Ilara closed her eyes briefly and opened them again. Teach them with their own saints. The mirror will hold you to your highest prayer. Raffi, I said. Heat margin, thin like paper. He grinned a fox's grin. But paper cuts. I said, sing our heat. The choir must see our intent as a straight line. She's always been brave in strange ways. She licked her lips and said, okay, in a small voice meant only for herself. Then she sent our breath into the choir. Palladium. I said, announce terms, fleet fires only to slow. Choir reflects only declared thresholds. We accept returned costs. Advocate Vey spoke like a bell at a dock at shift change. The words rang. The choir stamped its little white light. The freighter came on, awful and inevitable. Fleet fired. Not a kill shot, a drag. Kinetic grit needles that make the air around a target thick with consequences. The freighter slowed by fractions we could feel in our teeth. The choir took the energy and bent it through the registries, where do no harm sat like a child's drawing on a grown man's wall. It rerouted the burned-down rails labeled for evacuation drills and safety flares. The freighter's hull groaned. Plates buckled along seams you get when you cut corners with graft money. It did not explode. It sighed into pieces, each slowed by an ancient promise. One plate sheared free and tumbled toward a minor scaffold. I saw a woman there hauling a cable hook as big as her head, hair tied in a rag, mouth set. I tasted metal and cinnamon as adrenaline snatched my gut. Vector on plate, Raffi barked. Margin, negative. Gia snapped. No toys left. I'm a toy, Raffi said sweetly, and kicked our skiff's thruster like a man kicking a bar door open. Raffi Ilara began. He's right, I said. We owe them this. He burned us sideways into the plate's path with a shriek from a thruster that would make an engineer wake up cursing 10 systems later. Our little holes hissed big metal and leaned. The way you lean into a friend who's about to fall. Spars groaned. The plate glanced off, slowed enough that the woman on the scaffold ducked, swore, and lived. The skiff screamed, then blessedly quieted. The smell of burning insulation blew sweet and mean across our faces. My left palm stung. I looked down and saw I'd cut it on a sliver of console bezel in the little quake. "Cost?" I asked through my teeth. "Thruster 2 gone," Raffi said, laughter bubbling like someone about to cry. "Left panel scored. Pride dented beautifully. We'll tattoo it on later. Mark it," I said. Ledger entry: 1 thruster, 1 panel, blood from the commander's hand, 1 miner's life uncrushed. The freighter peeled apart like a lie told 3 times. Debris drifted and cooled. Fleet held fire. The choir hummed lower, as if wind had dropped. The little white light under the sigil blinked slowly, then steady. Captain Sarrett sank back into his chair as if the grave increased. He looked at me the way men look at tides they cannot command. "You made that harder," he said. "We made it honest," I replied. "Count hard things. They stay true longer." Palladium's advocate spoke the way verdicts do when they're more relief than punishment. Fleet. The court recognizes this act as lawful defense under public covenant. We propose the following precedent. Relics may reflect declared thresholds and vows, but may not amplify harm beyond those declarations. Stewards accept returned costs proportionally, with public ledger and physical marks. Alara nodded like a tired musician hearing a song played right. "We can live with that." She said, "So can miners. So can pirates, if they learn to read." Sarrett rubbed his eyes with thumb and forefinger, rings flashing. He could have said 100 things. He said, quietly, "You put my name in a ledger today. You put your own name there." I said, gentler than he deserved and kinder than I felt, "You can come read it whenever you like." He stared at the window, at the ring-dark world and the stubborn white light that would outlive both of us. "I will sign the covenant," he said finally. Each word a small tax paid out of a larger inheritance. Open logs, defensive reflection, return costs, joint oversight, signatures public. Signed, I said, and the coin in my pocket went cool. Count the moment a man chooses weight over shine. We went back to the choir with hands shaking and equipment limping. The rays welcomed us with a warmer amber, as if we had earned 1 degree of trust. The presence pressed against my thoughts like a teacher handing back a paper with a note. You did not cheat, even when it would have been easier. Good. Pirates applied for work under fake names and cursed creatively when we recognized them. We hired them anyway with checks they could not steal without signing. Cultists painted their bent sigils on hulls farther away where the mark couldn't shame them, then slowly washed them off when jobs demanded optics. Miners learned how to file claims with a pencil and a camera. Kids brought carved animals and drew the sigil correctly. We set up tribunal benches from scaffolding and hung tarps to keep the wind off witness cheeks. We painted the covenant on a wall big enough for liars to feel small in front of it. Palladium installed a bell, because even numbers need music. The choir printed its sigil on the lattice face after each major act. 1 for the pirates turned by their own thresholds. 1 for the cult's paint, falling like a scarf. 1 for the freighter taught its own do no harm. They were not pretty marks. They were sturdy. In 20 years, someone will run their finger along the grooves and feel the story punch through their skin into their remembering. Count with your hands when your tongue is tired. Costs accrued, and we paid them. We lost a second capacitor to a sudden load and held a small wake by the scar plate where Raffi poured broth on the metal like a libation. Gia sprained her wrist catching a falling panel during a quake and wore a brace she decorated with tiny sigils like stamps on a passport. Elara lost her voice for a day, arguing 3 men into becoming softer versions of themselves, and wrote all her instructions with a marker that stained her fingers blue. I cut my hand again on a bolt I hadn't sanded because someone called my name while I was busy wanting to be everywhere at once. Fleet sent a second squadron to relieve Sarit. They brought food and bandages and a chaplain who asked if relics preferred one kind of prayer over another. The choir answered by mirroring the chaplain's own ordination vow back at him until he cried a little and laughed a lot. Advocate Vey returned to the court and started a doctrine library titled in black letters, Reflection, not Reprisal. He argued like a man standing on a dock with a rope, keeping a ship from drifting into a story that would excise his grandchildren. He sent me a message with 7 words. This will hold if we all hold. Pirates stole a generator and then brought it back because the logs were too bright. Cultists tried to sing a closed hymn and found their throats liked the new songs better, the ones that counted as they went. Scavengers found bones in the ring yard that glowed faintly and learned with our help and Palladium's stern joy to treat remains as witnesses too. The choir asked more questions as it woke. Some were about loads and rates and thermal stress. Some were about whether mercy existing in the same sentence as ledgers was a contradiction or an aspirational pun. We learned to answer with numbers and stories. It liked both. We choose teaching because punishment is too easy to love. I wrote to my mother more often. She sent back weather reports and recipes, and once a photo of my grandmother's canoe. Its lacquer patched in places where storms had bitten it. Straight line. My mother texted once, is only righteous if it knows curves. I printed that and hung it by the Covenant wall until wind grimed it. Then I reprinted it and kept doing that, so it always looked freshly true. We had our first death a week later. Not dramatic, not spectacular. A line worker named Jarrow slipped on a frost patch while carrying a coil and struck his head on a clamp. He didn't wake. We logged it. Public in plain. We tallied the safety violations that had made the frost patch possible, then tallied the kindnesses he had done when no one was looking, because the choir collected those too. His widow stood under the sigil with her hands in her sleeves and watched numbers become money, and then food, and a school credit for her youngest. She said thank you once in a voice that made everyone look away, so they wouldn't drown. We etched Jarrow's name onto Mercy's wake scar plate. Costs were real. So were returns. Count the dead with love and ledger. Months moved like ships in traffic, sometimes slow and courteous, sometimes terrifying and near. We kept the logs open even when it rained paperwork. We sat on the tribunal bench until our hips ached and our tempers cooled in public air. We turned hostile energy back as often as people offered it. We reflected vows back at throats that had forgotten the taste of them. We canceled no one. We counted everyone. I changed, which is the only miracle I trust besides soup. Stewardship made me heavy in the right places. The short knives I'd kept under my jokes got dull because I stopped needing them. I stood under the sigil some nights when the wind cut through my coat and counted my breaths into the choir until I believed the count would not stop when I slept. Archivist 9 watched and learned with me. He began to use fewer clever metaphors and more plain nouns. He tried singing once, badly and bravely, with the miners' kids. And the choir did not laugh. It adjusted its hum to help him hide his thinness. He liked that. Elara grew an extra layer of patience and lost an extra layer of fear. She taught law to pirates and math to Palladium interns and kindness to me when I wanted to throw a wrench at a camera. Gia stopped looking like a student waiting for permission and started looking like a teacher waiting for everyone else to catch up. Raffi became the kind of man who can put down a weapon even when his hands itch because the weapon knows he will pick it up later if it's the right time. Count how your people change. Write it down. One night, after a day in which we had audited a shipping company into confessing that their lost crates had been hiding in the owner's apartment with his dog hair on them, the choir spoke to me alone. Not secret, nothing was secret, but personal. Like a letter tucked under a door with your name in a handwriting you admired. You are weary, it said. Yes, I said, sitting on a crate with my coat unfastened and my boots unlaced because the little grace of those undone knots felt like a rebellion big enough to carry me into sleep. You have not asked for reward, it said. We get soup, I said, and songs, and scars, it said. We etch their names, I said. They weigh less when we carry them together. Good, it said. Tomorrow a man will come who believes in collars so much he has forgotten how to count. He will bring a machine that converts vows into locks. He will ask you to partner with us. You must say no in a way that teaches him to count again. I can do no and counting, I said. I have practice. Teach with your refusal as carefully as with your yes. The man came. He wore Palladium's haircut and Fleet's posture in a private corporation smile. He brought a thing he called an alignment module, a gleaming cube that tasted of oil money and plausible deniability. It hummed a note almost like the choir's if you were drunk and tired. It makes consensus easy, he said, standing by our covenant wall as if he had paid for the paint. We plug it into the choir and it harmonizes deviance out. Laws become smooth. Protests quiet. Work flows. Alara looked at him the way you look at mold on bread. Consensus is a body's scar tissue over wounds healed properly, she said. Your box is anesthesia with a mortgage. It is safety, he said. It is a collar with music, I said. He glanced at my scarred hand like he'd planned to shake it and decided not to when he saw my nails dirty from bolts. You are brave, Commander, but unsophisticated. Thank you, I said. The choir remembers by ledgers, not collars. It will not take your box. We will not either. If you leave it here, we will throw it away in public, in pieces, with witnesses. He smiled in a way he'd practiced to make women want to like him. We could make this very profitable for you. Put it on the open log, I said. Then we can count it. He left with his toy. He went to a different ring yard to make his pitch in a darker hall. By then, our doctrine had traveled faster than he could. They told him no, too. Count the refusals. They are a song. When the first winter storm rolled through the anchorage, frost grew backward up from the rails like ghost grass. Everyone's breath smoked. Soup lines doubled and hands found mittens in pockets they didn't deserve. We stamped our feet and rubbed our ears and laughed and cursed and told stories to stay warm. The choir hummed steadier to keep the arrays from shutting their eyes. Fleet rigged windbreaks with the kind of competence they like to show off when they forget to be arrogant. Pirates stole blankets and brought them back because the logs burned hotter than wind. Palladium convened a formal session under our tarps and bells. They read the covenant aloud so even the wind had to learn law. Advocate Vey wore a hat that made him look like a farmer and not a judge, and I think he did it on purpose. He proposed what we had been living, a public precedent called Doctrine of Reflection Custody. It stated, relics that teach by numbers and remember by ledgers must be stewarded by those who accept public counting. Their first acts must be reflective, not retributive. Their logs must be open, their marks physical, their costs returned. No collar, no closed doors, witnesses fed, seats counted. Bells rung. We signed it. Fleet signed it. Pirates, under their real names, signed it. Cultists signed it with tight mouths and then relaxed. A little, as if their throats had forgotten how to be uncollared and were relearning. The noodle seller added her thumbprint in broth by accident, and we left the stain there because it looked like a blessing. Count the moment law becomes habit. The choir marked the lattice again. The little white light blinked with steady breath. The anchorages farther out began to ask for copies of our wall. We printed them. We sent soup recipes. We shipped scar plates with space for names not yet cut. One night later, after more storms, after more audits, after one fight, we lost with words and had to win with clever decoy heat and a busted knuckle. The arrays cooled. The amber faded to a quieter gold, like evening on a water road. The presence touched the back of my mind and said, "Now you know how to steward a small thing. Do you want a larger?" It wasn't arrogance. It was a teacher offering a harder book. I walked the hall with Lara and Raffi and Gia, our boots ringing out the count. We looked at the scar plate with its names. We looked at the covenant wall with its soup stain. We looked at each other with the weight that feels good. "Yes," I said, and it went into the ledger plain. Count our yes in a hand that does not shake. We woke the next section of the lattice carefully, publicly, hungrily, for good work. We invited more witnesses. We hired more pirates. We irritated more bureaucrats until they became better versions of themselves. We cut our hands on cleaner bolts. We taught a captain how to apologize without choking on the word. We counseled a child who wanted the choir to sing on his birthday and decided the song of counting was better than a candle. Fleet built a small school at the edge of the tribunal. Palladium funded a library nobody burned because the logs would have made the arsonist famous in ways he didn't want. The noodle seller expanded, bought a second pot, began to count recipes as doctrine. We got older. We got better. The choir woke, and when it asked who was worthy, we answered with lists of people we loved and names we hated and rules that made both live together without killing each other. It accepted us not because we were holy, but because we were accountable. In the end, which was not an end, I stood alone under the sigil at shift change and spoke quietly to the hall and the hum and the people taking their turns holding weight. I came to keep knives from deciding what justice looks like. I said, I stayed to count soup bowls, scar plates, and men who remember their vows when you read them aloud. This is our doctrine law as engine, mirror as shield, ledger as memory, witness as breath. We will tire. We will wish for callers. We will be offered shortcuts. We will say no. We will pay and be paid back. We will teach by numbers and love by numbers until love feels like the easiest math. The sigil's straight line lit one shade brighter. A new white blink appeared at its base as the arrays cooled. The ledger window in my hand blinked back with a single stubborn entry. We will be counted, and we will count.